I wasn't supposed to hear it. That's the sentence I keep repeating whenever I wonder if my life would still exist in its old shape if I had walked a little slower that afternoon. Her voice drifted through the half-open patio door while I carried groceries from the car. She was laughing with her sister, the kind of relaxed laugh I hadn't heard from her in months. "I mean, he was exactly what I needed back then," she said. "A safe place. But he was always just a phase." My feet stopped moving. Her sister asked something too quietly for me to catch. "No," my wife answered. "I loved what he gave me." "That's different." Every grocery bag suddenly felt like it weighed 100 pounds. For almost 12 years together, I thought we had built something permanent. We had a comfortable house, a daughter who adored both of us, routines that felt ordinary in the best possible way. We argued about bills and vacations, laughed over terrible movies, planned retirement. Nothing spectacular. Nothing dramatic. Just life. Or at least I thought it was life. Standing outside my own home, listening to my wife reduce me to a chapter she'd already finished, I realized I might have been living inside someone else's temporary decision all along. I wish I could say that was the first sign something was wrong, but it wasn't. The truth is, the warning signs had been piling up for over a year, and I had turned every one of them into a reasonable explanation. She started working late more often. At first it was one evening a week, then 3, then almost every day. Whenever I asked if everything was okay, she'd smile, kiss my forehead, and blame a new manager or another impossible deadline. I believed her because trusting her felt easier than questioning the person I'd built my entire adult life around. There were smaller things too. She stopped reaching for my hand during walks. Conversations became practical instead of personal. We talked about groceries, our daughter's school, mortgage payments, but never about us. Still, every now and then she'd surprise me with a warm hug or suggest ordering our favorite takeout, and I'd convince myself we were simply going through one of those difficult seasons every marriage experiences. Looking back now, I wasn't blind. I was afraid that if I looked too closely, I'd find exactly what I was trying so hard not to see. After overhearing that conversation, I couldn't pretend everything was normal anymore. I didn't storm into the backyard or confront her that evening. Instead, I acted like I hadn't heard a thing. That turned out to be the hardest performance of my life. For days, I replayed her words over and over. Just a phase. The phrase echoed in my head while I drove to work, made dinner, and tucked our daughter into bed. I started paying attention in ways I never had before. She guarded her phone more carefully than usual. If a notification appeared, she'd flip the screen over without thinking. She began taking calls outside, saying the reception was better there, even though she'd always talked inside before. I hated myself for noticing these details. I wasn't the jealous type, and I didn't want to become one. Then one Friday night, she came home smiling. Not at me, not at our daughter, just smiling to herself. When I asked what had happened, she hesitated for a split second before answering. "Nothing," she said. "Just a good day at work." For the first time in our marriage, I knew she was lying. The moment my doubt turned into real suspicion happened by complete accident. A week later, we were watching television after our daughter had gone to bed. My wife was in the kitchen making tea when her phone, which she'd forgotten on the coffee table, lit up. I wasn't trying to snoop. I only glanced because the vibration caught my attention. The preview on the screen read, "I miss you already." Today wasn't enough. There was no name, just a single blue heart beside the number. Before I could process what I was looking at, she rushed back into the living room. The panic on her face lasted less than a second, but I saw it. She grabbed the phone so quickly that she nearly knocked over her mug. "Who was that?" I asked as calmly as I could. "A coworker," she answered without even checking the screen. "Do your coworkers usually text that they miss you?" She laughed, but it sounded forced. "You know how people joke around." I nodded, even though nothing about it felt like a joke. That night she waited until she thought I was asleep before quietly leaving the bedroom with her phone. I lay there in the dark, staring at the ceiling, realizing trust had finally started slipping through my fingers. I told myself I wouldn't become the kind of husband who searched through phones or followed his wife. I wanted proof to come from honesty, not desperation. But honesty never came. A few days later, she asked me to pick up our daughter from school because she had another late meeting. Around 7 that evening, I drove past her office on my way home, mostly to quiet the storm in my head. The parking lot was almost empty. Her car wasn't there. I sat across the street for nearly 20 minutes, convincing myself she had parked somewhere else. Then I called her. She answered on the third ring. "I'm still at work," she said over the sound of muffled voices. I looked at the dark office building. "Really?" "Yeah." "Why?" "I was just checking when you'd be home." There was a pause. Probably another hour. When we hung up, I stayed there for another 5 minutes before driving away. I didn't know where she was. I only knew one thing for certain. She had lied to me twice in less than 10 minutes, and somehow that hurt even more than the possibility of why the truth finally started pulling itself into the light because of something she forgot to delete. The following Sunday morning, she left her phone charging upstairs while she took our daughter to the backyard to help plant flowers. Mine had died, and I needed to call my brother about our mother's upcoming surgery. I grabbed her phone without thinking, assuming she'd have no problem with it. Before I could unlock it, a message appeared on the lock screen. "Can't stop thinking about last night. I wish we didn't have to pretend." My stomach dropped. This time there was a name. Daniel. I didn't open the conversation. I didn't need to. My hands were shaking so badly I nearly dropped the phone onto the hardwood floor. When she came back inside, she immediately looked toward the charger. "Did you touch my phone?" "I was going to call my brother." She picked it up and looked at me for a long moment. "You read my messages?" "No," I answered truthfully. "I didn't have to." The color drained from her face. Neither of us spoke. For the first time since we'd met, silence felt louder than any argument we could have had. She was the first one to break the silence. "It isn't what you think," she whispered, clutching the phone so tightly her knuckles turned white. I laughed. Not because anything was funny, but because I couldn't believe those were the words she had chosen. "Then tell me what I think." She looked toward the back door, where our daughter was still outside, completely unaware that her parents' marriage was cracking apart only a few feet away. "Please don't do this here." "So there is something to do?" She covered her face with one hand and started crying. "I never wanted you to find out like this." My heart sank. Not because she'd admitted anything directly, but because she'd skipped past denial and gone straight to damage control. I asked the question I had been dreading. "Who is Daniel?" She sat down at the kitchen table without answering. Finally, barely above a whisper, she said, "Someone from work." "How long?" Another pause. "A little over a year." The room seemed to tilt. A year. While we'd celebrated birthdays, anniversaries, and holidays. While I'd believed we were simply going through a rough patch. She had been living an entirely different life beside mine. I don't remember raising my voice, but I remember every word that came out of her mouth. "It wasn't supposed to happen," she kept saying through tears. "We became friends first. We talked." He listened. I stared at her. "So I deserve this because he listened?" "No. That's not what I mean." "Then explain it to me." She couldn't. Every explanation sounded like another excuse. She said she had felt lonely, that we'd become roommates instead of partners, that she didn't know how to tell me she was unhappy. I won't pretend our marriage had been perfect. We'd both been exhausted by work, parenting, and the endless routine of adult life. But I had been fighting for us. She had been investing that energy somewhere else. Then I asked the question that had haunted me ever since I overheard her in the backyard. "When you told your sister I was just a phase, did you mean it?" She closed her eyes. When she opened them again, they were full of shame. I didn't think you'd ever hear that. Answer me. Her voice cracked. I don't even know what I believe anymore. Somehow, that hurt more than if she'd simply said yes. The conversation dragged on for hours, circling the same wounds until neither of us had any strength left. Then she said something that changed everything. I met Daniel before I met you. I froze. What? We dated for a few months years ago. It ended because he moved away. I felt the blood drain from my face. So when he came back. She nodded without looking at me. We ran into each other at work. At first it was just catching up. I pushed my chair back so hard it scraped across the floor. You expect me to believe this just happened? No. She wiped at her eyes. I think part of me never really let him go. There it was. The sentence I'd been afraid of without even knowing it. I wasn't competing with a stranger. I had spent 12 years unknowingly standing in the shadow of someone she'd loved before me. Suddenly her words from the patio made perfect sense. A safe place. A phase. I wasn't the love story she'd wanted. I was the life she'd settled into after the first one ended. And the moment that first chapter reopened, she walked straight back into it, leaving me to discover that I had never been the ending she truly imagined. The days that followed felt unreal. We didn't separate immediately because neither of us knew how to explain any of this to our daughter. So we pretended. We ate dinner together. We smiled during school events. We sat on the same couch every evening, leaving just enough space between us to make it feel like a canyon. At night, I lay awake listening to her cry in the guest room. I wanted to hate her. It would have been so much easier. Instead, I kept remembering the woman I had fallen in love with. The one who danced barefoot in the kitchen, who squeezed my hand during scary movies, who stayed up all night with me after our daughter was born because we were both terrified of doing something wrong. Were those memories fake? Or had they simply stopped being enough for her? Friends began asking if everything was okay. Apparently we had become terrible actors. I lied to everyone. Just stress. Work has been crazy. The truth felt too humiliating to say out loud. I couldn't bear the thought of people looking at me with pity, wondering how I had missed an affair that had lasted more than a year under my own roof. Eventually, pretending became impossible. One evening I asked her a question I had avoided since the confession. Does he know about me? She nodded. He knows I'm married. And he stayed anyway. Another nod. That answer hurt in a different way. Until then, I had imagined some fantasy where he'd been misled too, or he'd believed she was separated or trapped in a loveless marriage. Instead, he knew I existed and chose not to care. What about our daughter? I asked. He knows about her too. I felt physically sick. So every time you were with him, both of you knew there was a little girl waiting for her mother to come home. She started crying again, but I couldn't comfort her anymore. I ended it, she said suddenly. I looked up. What? I told him it was over after you found out. For a brief second, I wanted to believe it mattered. Then I realized something. She hadn't ended the affair because she chose our family. She ended it because there was no longer anything left to hide. That difference became impossible for me to ignore, no matter how desperately I wanted a reason to stay. A week later, we finally told our daughter that we were going to live in different houses for a while. We rehearsed the conversation beforehand, agreeing on every sentence. We promised each other there would be no blaming, no shouting, no details she was too young to carry. She looked back and forth between us with confused eyes. Did I do something wrong? That question nearly broke me. I knelt in front of her and hugged her so tightly she laughed for a second before realizing I was crying. No, sweetheart. Never. This is between Mom and me. She accepted the explanation because children trust their parents even when the explanation doesn't make sense. That innocence felt like another thing we destroyed. After she went to bed, the house was painfully quiet. My wife whispered. I never wanted to hurt her. I answered without raising my voice. But you knew you would. She didn't argue. She couldn't. For the first time since everything came apart, there were no excuses left, no careful wording, no attempts to soften the truth. Just two exhausted people sitting in a home that no longer felt like either of ours, surrounded by memories that suddenly belonged to a family that no longer existed. Moving into a small apartment was harder than I expected. It wasn't the size that bothered me. It was the silence. When my daughter stayed with me, the place felt alive. We'd make pancakes that always came out uneven, watch cartoons on Saturday mornings, and build blanket forts in the living room. For those few days, I could almost forget everything. Then she'd go back to her mother's house. The silence would return. I started questioning every memory from our marriage. I searched for clues that I'd missed, wondering if she'd been pretending from the very beginning or if love had simply faded without either of us noticing. The worst part wasn't losing my wife. It was losing certainty. I no longer trusted my own judgment. If I could spend 12 years believing someone saw me as her forever while she quietly wondered if I had only been a chapter, what else had I misunderstood? Friends encouraged me to start dating again. I couldn't. Every compliment sounded suspicious. Every kind gesture made me wonder what wasn't being said. The affair had ended, but the doubted plant had kept growing long after she was gone. About 8 months after we separated, she asked if we could meet for coffee without our daughter. I almost said no. Curiosity won. She looked different. Not happier. Just tired in a way I recognized because I saw the same expression every morning in my own mirror. After a long silence, she admitted that things with Daniel had fallen apart almost immediately. He thought we'd finally get our happy ending, she said quietly. I realized I didn't even know who we were outside the affair. I didn't feel satisfaction. I expected some sense of justice, but it never came. Instead, I just felt empty. I'm sorry, she whispered. Not because it failed. Because I finally understand what I destroyed. Those words would have meant everything a year earlier. Now they arrived too late. I told her I forgave her for my own peace of mind, but forgiveness wasn't the same as trust. Some bridges don't collapse all at once. They rot slowly from the inside until one day you step forward, believing they'll hold you, and discover they've already been gone for a very long time. It's been 3 years now. People who meet me today assume I'm doing well because I smile more than I used to. I have a stable routine, a job I still enjoy, and a healthy relationship with my daughter. Her mother and I can sit through school plays and birthdays without arguing. From the outside, it looks like we've figured things out. Maybe that's what healing looks like. Or maybe it's just learning how to carry something heavy without letting everyone see the weight. I still think about that afternoon sometimes. Not the confession about Daniel. Not even the affair itself. I think about those words drifting through the patio door. He was just a phase. An affair can explain betrayal. It can't explain how someone quietly rewrites the story of your entire life while you're still living inside it. If there's one thing I've learned, it's that love isn't only about being chosen once. It's about being chosen again and again, especially after the excitement fades and ordinary life begins. I believed I was someone's forever. The hardest part was discovering that, in her heart, I had only ever been the place she stopped before trying to find her way back to someone else.